Close your eyes for a moment. Picture winter, cold air, dark skies, soft lights glowing in windows. Christmas doesn't feel like a belief, it feels like a memory. Even people who don't believe in God still decorate trees, still gather, still feel something. And that's the strange part, because the power of Christmas was never about Jesus. Not historically, not psychologically, not even emotionally. What you're celebrating is far older, far deeper. And once you see it, Christmas doesn't disappear. It finally makes sense. The date that never mattered. Let's start with a simple question. Why December 25? It feels obvious now, almost unquestionable, as if it was always known and always agreed upon. But the truth is far quieter and far more revealing than most people expect. Early Christians did not celebrate birthdays. Not Jesus's, not Mary's, not the apostles'. Birthdays were seen as a pagan obsession, tied to ego, fate, and earthly identity, rather than salvation or spiritual transformation. In fact, the only birthdays mentioned in the Bible belong to tyrants, Pharaoh, Herod, and both stories end in violence. That association mattered. Birthdays were not holy moments. They were reminders of power, not humility. So the idea that the earliest followers of Jesus carefully preserved his birth date simply does not hold up. They did not record it. They did not debate it. They did not care. The Bible itself is silent. No gospel gives a date. No letter hints at a season. No early church document treats the birth as something to commemorate annually. For generations, it simply was not part of Christian practice. That raises an uncomfortable question. If December 25 was not known, not remembered, and not valued, why choose it at all? The answer is not theological, it is practical. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, Christianity was no longer a small, persecuted movement. It was spreading fast, especially across Europe, and Europe already had something deeply rooted in this exact time of year. Winter festivals. People already gathered then. They already lit fires, exchanged gifts, sang, feasted, and marked the return of light. These rituals were older than any church. They were woven into survival itself. Trying to remove them failed, ignoring them failed, but reinterpreting them worked. December 25 was not chosen because it revealed truth. It was chosen because it solved a problem. It aligned a growing religion with an existing emotional rhythm that people refused to abandon. This was not deception in the cartoon villain sense. It was adaptation, a recognition that belief alone rarely replaces tradition. And right here, without drama or announcement, the story of Christmas begins to quietly change. The festivals that refuse to die. Long before Christianity reached Europe, people were already marking this exact time of year, not out of doctrine or belief, but out of necessity. Winter was not symbolic, it was dangerous. The days shortened, the sun weakened, the cold crept into homes and bodies, and food became uncertain. Darkness was not poetic, it was something to endure. So humans responded the way they always have. They created light where none was guaranteed. They gathered when isolation threatened the mind. They celebrated not because they felt joyful, but because joy itself became a survival tool. Across cultures, the pattern was the same. Saturnalia in Rome, Yule in the north, Sol Invictus honoring the unconquered sun. Different gods, different stories, but the same emotional architecture. A pause in the darkness, a reminder that light returns, a collective refusal to surrender to winter. Feasting mattered because hunger was real. Candles mattered because fire meant life. Green trees mattered because they symbolized endurance when everything else died. Songs mattered because silence could feel unbearable. Gift-giving mattered because generosity reinforced bonds when resources were thin. These were not casual traditions. They were rituals carved into human behavior by centuries of hardship, and that is why they did not disappear when Christianity arrived. Beliefs can be argued against. Rituals cannot be easily removed. When something regulates fear, loneliness, and uncertainty, it embeds itself deeper than ideas ever could. So these festivals were not destroyed. They were absorbed. Their names changed. Their stories shifted. But their structure remained intact. Because When you try to eliminate a ritual that keeps people psychologically stable, it does not vanish. It does not resist loudly either. It waits. It waits for a new story to wear. Why the church needed winter. Here is something rarely discussed, even in religious history. Winter was dangerous for early churches, not spiritually, but practically. When cold arrived, everything slowed. Travel became difficult. Odes emptied. Small gatherings became smaller, and enthusiasm quietly faded. Attendance dropped not because faith weakened, but because survival took priority. People stayed close to home. Communities turned inward. Long sermons and distant meetings lost their pull when warmth and food mattered more than doctrine. Morale suffered too. Darkness affects the mind. Isolation breeds doubt. A belief system that thrives on shared presence struggles when people stop gathering. Faith alone, no matter how sincere, was not enough to keep people connected through the harshest months of the year. But rituals did something belief could not. Rituals warmed people emotionally. They gave structure to the season. They provided anticipation when days felt endless. They replaced fear with familiarity. So instead of resisting winter, the church learned to move with it. Instead of condemning the festivals people already loved, it absorbed them. This was not done with force, but with strategy. The celebrations were not destroyed. They were renamed. The gods were replaced. The meanings were rewritten. But the rhythm stayed the same. The lights, the gatherings, the shared meals. The sense that this moment in the year mattered more than others. Because conversion works best when it does not feel like loss. It works when it feels like continuity. When people recognize the shape of what they already know, familiarity lowers resistance. It softens fear. It makes new beliefs feel old, and therefore safe. That is why winter mattered so much, not as a theological milestone, but as an emotional bottleneck. Whoever owned winter rituals owned people's attention when they were most vulnerable. And once the church understood that, belief stopped being the only tool. Tradition became the bridge. Ritual comes before belief. Here is the psychological truth most people miss, and once you see it, it becomes impossible to unsee. Humans do not believe first, they practice first. We like to imagine belief as something clean and rational. A thought forms, a conviction settles, and behavior follows. But that is not how the mind actually works. The order is reversed. Action comes first, meaning comes later. You do not feel meaning and then repeat a ritual. You repeat a ritual, again and again, and meaning slowly attaches itself. The body learns before the mind agrees. Lighting candles, wires, comfort long before anyone explains why. Soft light lowers tension. Warm colors signal safety. Over time, the body associates that feeling with significance. Music works the same way. A melody repeated each year does not just entertain. It stores memory. It creates emotional shortcuts back to moments of closeness, warmth, and belonging. Repetition is the most underestimated force in human psychology. What is repeated feels true. What feels familiar feels right. And what feels right rarely gets questioned. This is why children feel Christmas long before they understand it. Long before theology, they sense anticipation, warmth, rhythm, a change in the air. The ritual teaches them how to feel first. The story comes later. This is also why atheists still feel it. Even when belief is gone, the body remembers. The nervous system responds before the intellect has a chance to object. You can reject the story and still feel the pull, because the pull was never purely about belief. Belief does not create ritual. Ritual creates belief. It creates emotional certainty first and intellectual justification second. This pattern is not unique to religion. It appears in culture, politics, relationships, and identity itself. What we do repeatedly becomes what we defend. And once you understand this, everything changes. Christmas stops looking like a belief system people chose. It starts looking like a ritual system that shaped belief quietly, patiently, over generations. Why Christmas feels holy without faith. Ask yourself something honestly, without defending it or explaining it away. Why does Christmas music still work, even if you do not believe? Why do a few soft lights in the dark change your mood almost instantly? Why does silence feel heavier in December than it does at any other time of year? The answer is simpler than theology and deeper than doctrine. Your nervous system does not care about belief. It does not evaluate stories or argue about truth claims. It responds to patterns, to rhythm, to warmth, to signals of safety and belonging. Slow music lowers the heart rate. Familiar melodies calm the brain. Dim light tells the body it can rest. Gathering tells the nervous system it is not alone. None of this requires faith. It requires repetition. What many people describe as holy is often just ancient familiarity, a feeling the body recognizes before the mind names it. A sense of significance that arrives without explanation, because it was learned long before words were attached to it. This is why the atmosphere matters more than the message. You can remove the sermon and keep the feeling. You can forget the story and still feel the weight of the season. The emotion survives because it was never dependent on belief in the first place. The body remembers what kept it safe, what brought warmth in the cold, what signaled that darkness would not last forever. These sensations were passed down not through books, but through shared experiences, repeated year after year. A story taught to the nervous system travels further than one taught to the intellect. It settles deeper. It resists erasure. And that story did not begin in a church. It did not start with doctrine or scripture. It began much earlier, when humans gathered close, protected a flame, and waited together for the light to return. Stories fade. Rituals survive. Beliefs change over time. They shift, fracture, and get rewritten. Gods rise, fall, and are replaced by new names that promise the same answers. History is full of forgotten deities and abandoned doctrines. But rituals move differently through time. Rituals outlive empires. Stories depend on language. Scripture depends on literacy. Belief requires explanation, interpretation, and agreement. Ritual asks for none of that. It only asks participation. You do not need to understand why you light a candle to feel its effect. You do not need to agree with a story to repeat a gesture that brings comfort. This is why traditions survive conquest. Armies can destroy temples, but they struggle to erase habits. They can ban gods, but they cannot easily remove the seasonal rhythms people live by. Festivals survive conversion because they are embedded in daily life, not abstract belief. Christmas survived even as belief weakened because its foundation was never fragile. Long after doctrine fades, the structure remains, the timing, the gatherings. The sensory cues that signal this moment in the year is different. The church did not invent this, it inherited it. It stepped into something already alive and gave it a new explanation, and that difference matters. Instruction tells people what to think. Inheritance tells them what to feel. One can be argued against. The other is absorbed quietly, often without awareness. That is why rituals are so powerful. They bypass resistance. They move through generations without needing defense. People may forget the story, but they keep the habit. They may doubt the belief, but they repeat the action. And as long as the ritual continues, the meaning never fully disappears. It simply waits for a new story to carry it forward. The inversion. And this is where everything quietly turns upside down, not with drama or confrontation, but with a simple reversal that changes how the entire season makes sense. Most people assume the order is obvious. I celebrate Christmas because I believe. The belief comes first, and the rituals follow as expressions of that faith. It feels logical, clean, comfortable. But history tells a different story. Psychology confirms it, and tradition reveals it if you look closely enough. People do not celebrate Christmas because they believe. Belief is not the engine, it is the echo. They believe because they celebrate. The ritual comes first, the gathering, the lights, the repetition, the shared pause in the year. Meaning grows around these actions, not the other way around. Over time, the story attaches itself to the behavior, explaining feelings that already exist. Ritual creates emotional certainty. It creates familiarity, and familiarity feels like truth. Once something feels true, belief forms naturally around it, not through argument, but through comfort. This is why belief systems feel so solid. They are reinforced, not weekly or yearly, but rhythmically. Season after season, generation after generation, the body learns the pattern long before the mind names it. Ritual first, meaning second, always. Once you see this inversion, Christmas stops looking like a declaration of faith. It starts looking like a cultural engine that produces belief quietly, without demand or debate. And that realization changes not just how you see Christmas, but how you understand belief itself. Christmas isn't fake. It's older than Christianity, and that is not a flaw. It's the reason it endured. This season does not belong to a single religion or doctrine. It belongs to humans. It belongs to our fear of darkness and our instinct to respond with light, to our need for warmth when the world grows cold, to our impulse to gather, to mark time together, to remind ourselves that we are not alone. Understanding this does not strip Christmas of meaning. It returns meaning to its roots, stripped of dogma, yes, but grounded in something far more durable: human psychology, shared memory, survival turned into tradition. And maybe that is why it still works, even when belief fades. The ritual remains because it was never built on belief alone. If this helped you see tradition differently, if understanding made the season richer rather than weaker, stay curious. Subscribe if you value truth without losing meaning. And whatever you celebrate this season, remember why humans have always lit lights in the dark.